When you're chairing a meeting, one of the things that many people fear, one of the things you least look forward to, is dealing with difficult participants. So that's what we're going to look at in this video. If you're going to deal with difficult participants, the first thing you need to understand is why we get difficult participants, and I think it's all to do with communication. The way I see it, the bulk of our participants, the people who behave well, are easy to handle, are interested in getting the best out of the meeting, are good communicators who can therefore communicate assertively. But at opposite ends of the spectrum, we have both our passive and aggressive behaviours, which represent poor modes of communication, inefficient communication from those participants. And as we get to the outliers at the very extremes, we get genuinely difficult people. But I learned something really important early on in my career, which is that there are no difficult participants in a meeting. There are just inflexible meeting facilitators and chairs who don't have the resources to handle the behaviours that we encounter. So in this video, we're going to look at some of the techniques you can use, and indeed some of the kind of behaviours you're likely to encounter and what sort of techniques can apply to each of those behaviours. I've got 10 general strategies to introduce to you, and the first of them is to think about setting ground rules, to agree the standards of behaviour for the group and for the meeting. People are often reluctant to set ground rules, and if genuinely your organisation has internalised a set of rules for a meeting, if you're expecting difficult behaviours, then all you need to do is to remind people of the rules that are already there. But if you're coming into a new situation, or if you particularly fear poor behaviours, invite the group to contribute ideas for the kinds of behaviours that they want to see. The majority of the group will set the right ground rules, and you'll be fine. But make sure that you include amongst those the key, most important rule of all for an effective meeting, which is respectful behaviours. Everyone in the room respects everyone else in the room. You might disagree with their ideas, you might not like their behaviours, but you respect them as a human being. The second strategy is possibly a strategy to start with if you only get one incidence of poor behaviour, and that's to ignore it and hope it goes away, because sometimes somebody does something which they later realise was foolish and they don't repeat it. So you might choose not to make a big thing of it the first time it happens. Clearly, if it's really disrespectful, then you do need to address that, but a simple interruption or a huffy remark, just a little bit of discourtesy, you might want to let that go. Strategy 3 builds on that, and that's actually to give the bad behaviour a little airtime, to let people let off a bit of steam. Again, this isn't appropriate if the behaviour is disrespectful or if it's mightily disruptive to the meeting, but sometimes people do get angry and they need to have their say, and as long as they do it in an appropriate way, let them let off that steam and then close that session, say, well, thank you, Mark, that really wasn't comfortable for us, but I hope we can put that behind us now and move on. But if you are going to do that, then you do need to contain it and make sure that it doesn't happen a second time. Strategy 4 recognises that there are other people in the room, and sometimes you can ask people in the room or the group as a whole to respond to the behaviour they've seen, so that you don't have to put it down. Now, don't do this as a way of shirking your responsibility, but do recognise that other people will want to have a say if there is bad behaviour. So you could ask the group, look, we've seen some, what I think is disrespectful behaviour. How do we feel about that? What is it that we want to do about that? Do we want to move on, or do we want to look at what's been said? Strategy 5 can work for some people, but don't use it if you are not completely sure that it'll work for you, and that is to use humour to distract from the bad behaviour and to move the meeting forwards. Certainly, if you make light of bad behaviour, it can deal with the types of bad behaviour which are allied to bullying or someone trying to dominate the meeting inappropriately. If they know that you're not interested in that and you use humour to dismiss it, then they might just get back in their box. My primary strategy, though, is to call out the bad behaviour, to describe it as it is, to say this is inappropriate behaviour, this is bullying, this is aggressive, this is disrespectful, this is lazy, you're not paying attention to the meeting. Whatever the bad behaviour is, describe it, label it, and make it clear that you're not prepared to accept it. Not because it offends you, but because it disrupts the meeting and is disrespectful to the whole group. Strategy 7 is when you're not quite sure how to handle it, or the behaviour isn't resolving, and that's to take a break and give it some time. And strategy 8 is to use that break to have a quiet word with the perpetrator, or if you feel that you don't have enough authority or confidence to do it, perhaps find someone within the group that you trust and can support you and engage the perpetrator with that support. Strategy 9 is a little more subtle, although people will immediately get what you're doing, and that's to recognise that people change their behaviour according to their surroundings. So deliberately lay the table during the break in a different way and put the perpetrator next to the kind of people in the room who are more likely to help you to manage the situation by intervening or perhaps having a quiet word with the perpetrator to stop them behaving badly. And I suppose there is a strategy 10, although it can feel like an admission of failure if you really can't handle the situation. If you're not making any progress, then adjourn the meeting. What that's saying to the perpetrator could be read as you've won, but it could also be read as I am not prepared to put up with this and therefore we're stopping it. So make it clear to the whole meeting and to the perpetrator that you're stopping the meeting as a sign of respect to the people who are behaving well, to give them a chance to escape from inappropriate behaviour, and you will reconvene the meeting at another time when either the perpetrator will commit to behave well or you will hold the meeting without them. So now let's scamper through a fairly large number of different types of bad behaviour to give you a flavour of what you might encounter. I really don't want to do this to scare you, but to give you a resource pool of ideas for how to handle those types of behaviour and indeed how to recognise them if they occur. The first is the late arriver, and I would say start off by setting a very clear expectation that the meeting will start on time. You could argue that it's rude to the person who hasn't turned up for you to start without them. I would argue it is disrespectful to the people who have turned up on time to make them wait because someone else is delayed. Now, clearly there are circumstances where that one person or a number of late people are late for a good reason and you do need to wait for them. But by and large, start when you say you're going to start and make it the problem of the person who is late to catch up. I know that some meeting chairs have very particular routines which you might like to think about. One is, in some organisations, to have a kind of collection box so that if people turn up late to a meeting, they need to put $1 or £1 or some money into it for a charity. Some chairs actually lock the meeting room door at the start of the meeting so that anyone who arrives late has to actually knock and be admitted or may not be admitted. My favourite is to set meetings at 50 minutes length rather than 1 hour length, or 25 minutes rather than half an hour. And the reason for that is to give time between meetings for people to get there on time and to arrive early. And talking of early, the early leaver, the person who gets up and leaves the meeting before it's finished. How do you handle that? Carry on without them. Pointedly say, leaving? Thank you very much. We're carrying on. Sometimes people have a good reason for leaving early, and if they do it in a respectful manner, apologising to the group or advising you in advance and making sure that you can apologise on their behalf, that's fine. But if someone just gets up and leaves, then just carry on without them. And again, the 50-minute meeting rather than an hour-minute meeting should make it less likely that this happens. If someone is a repeat offender and they turn up late or leave early, often then a quiet word with them is in order. What about shy, quiet, retiring people who don't say anything in a meeting? Some people perceive that as problem behaviour. I don't, because some people just don't like speaking out. It doesn't mean they don't get a lot from being in a meeting. It doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of good ideas during the meeting. It doesn't mean they're not interested. It just means they're shy, quiet people. However, getting their ideas and their contribution is important, so use mechanisms that encourage individuals to speak and to feel safe in speaking. One way to do this is a round robin, where you invite each person in the meeting to speak in turn. That way everyone gets equal airtime and nobody is singled out for making a contribution. Another is to call on people and ask for their input on a particular discussion point, to invite them in. And another is to use non-spoken forms of facilitation, perhaps asking people to write contributions on cards or something, using techniques like brainwriting. Next is the challenger, the person who challenges everything. Now, it's valuable to have someone challenge ideas, but someone who just challenges everything? And of course, there's the extreme version of that, the know-it-all who has to be right about everything. Whatever you say, they will say something different. For me, the solution is to make sure you document their point of view. Make sure they know you're taking them seriously, but then bring in other people to comment on the point. So if one colleague makes a point and the challenger or the know-it-all contradicts it, then invite other people to give their perceptions and their perspectives. Let that person know that they can't constantly challenge without having pushback against their challenge and evidence brought that maybe they don't know everything. Next is the interrupter, the person who interrupts you while you're speaking. As chair, you need to ensure that people aren't interrupted when they're speaking, particularly not as a routine by the same person. So if you've got an interrupter, then interrupt them. Say, thank you. I think it was Jane who was speaking, and I want to hear what Jane says, and then we'll come back to you when she's finished. Let people know that interrupting isn't going to advance the meeting. If they do it too often, Jane was speaking. I'd like you not to interrupt. Thank you very much. And make sure they know that that's unacceptable. But here, we're effectively punishing them by not coming back to them at a later point. Less respectful still is the attacker, the person who will mount a personal attack on someone who's spoken. And for this one, it is essential that you get in between them and the person they're attacking. You need to stop that, bring it to a satisfactory conclusion, because if they're allowed to get away with attacking people who make important, valuable contributions to the meeting, then you will frighten off the people you want. So step in, stop the bad behaviour, and if absolutely necessary, ask them to leave. Now we've got the backseat driver who wants to run the meeting instead of you. What do you do about them? What I would say is listen to their suggestions, thank them for their suggestions, tell them you'll take them into account, and then maintain control of the meeting and do it the way you think you should do it, which may be to change your approach based on what they've suggested, or it may be to stick to the approach you were planning. With this sort of person, always have a word with them in the break. Now we come to the person who wants to be the centre of attention. They want to grab the meeting's attention at all times. For them, you need to pay a little attention to them, record their ideas, and then respectfully ask them to hand control of the meeting back to the person who's speaking. Shut them down respectfully, enforce turn-taking, and require that everyone makes contributions through the chair. A particular example of the centre of attention is the joker, the person who needs to make jokes, needs to bring out humour in everything. Now, sometimes this is a valuable contribution, so while that humour is appropriate, respectful, and not disruptive of the meeting, it's fine to let it happen occasionally, but the point at which it starts to disrupt the meeting or upset or threaten to upset anybody, that's the point where, again, you need to shut it down and require that person makes contributions through the chair. What about the busy person who needs to pop in and out of the meeting, has got calls to make and needs to pop out? Well, I would handle this by asking them to either be in the meeting or to be out of the meeting. Create breaks so that they can step out at scheduled times when it's not disruptive, but if they can't avoid coming in and going out constantly, then ask them to step out of the meeting and to skip the meeting. Of course, this can also happen with people who stay in the meeting physically, but mentally they skip in and out. They've got their email in front of them, their phone, their laptop, their device. For that person, I would start by holding them in your eye. Make sure you make eye contact with them when they look up, look at their device, and just privately chastise them. If you need to, ask everyone if they've got laptops open and they're not using them for the meeting, recording the meeting or making notes or presenting to the meeting, to close their laptop, to put devices away. A good ground rule, of course, is around use of devices in meetings. If you've set that, then enforce it. Another variant on that is the gossip, the person who is constantly leaning over to their neighbour to have a little conversation with them. Again, enforce the rules, ask people to be respectful. When you're in the room, be in the room. There's only one person speaking, let's listen to them. Now, here's a subtle one. Do you have someone who comes to your meetings and constantly throughout the meetings will be listening and then going? They'll be shaking their head subtly. People will spot them and they will bring the tone of the meeting down. What they're doing is they're being constantly negative, constantly critical of what's being said without making contributions themselves. This is passive-aggressive behaviour. Be under no illusions. It's disruptive, it's aggressive, it's just done in an underhand manner. So call it out. Chris, you appear to disagree with what's being said. Please tell us your thoughts. If they have some things to say and they say them, you can then critique them through the group appropriately. If, on the other hand, they decline to contribute, you can then say, okay, we'll kindly avoid disruptive behaviour. Here's another one. It's the interpreter. The person who says, what you're saying is, and then will impose their point of view on another person's point. If you get an interpreter who tries to interpret what other people are saying and perhaps even twist it around to their own point of view, then be aware that that is subtle manipulation of the group, sometimes not that subtle. So what you need to do then is go back to the person who is speaking, look them in the eye, smile at them, let them know you're on their side and say, could you tell us what you meant by that and whether that interpretation is a fair one? Make sure the meeting gets to hear what the speaker intends of what they say. Next, we have two very similar ones. The verbose person who constantly goes on and on and on and on and on about a topic, and the broken record approach of repeating themselves again and again. asking people to stop, saying, we've got the idea, thank you very much, is entirely appropriate. Or you could use your black hole cards. A simple card with a black hole on, and at the start of the meeting agree that if anyone detects that the meeting is circling around going over the same topic again and again, they should play their black hole card. And if anyone agrees with that and plays theirs, then that's it. Whoever's speaking stops and we move the meeting forward. And finally, there's that side conversation that's going on. It's different to gossip because it's about what's going on in a meeting. But again, enforce the one meeting, one conversation rule. But in this case, invite that person to share their comments. That's the way you'll find out whether actually they're talking about something that is genuinely useful or whether it is just a bit of gossip or a little bit of inappropriate criticism of what's being said. So there we have a large number of different behaviours and a huge range of strategies you can apply. My hope is that through this video you'll realise that although difficult behaviours can be disconcerting for a chair, for a meeting facilitator, particularly if you're relatively new to it, you have plenty of strategies you can apply. There is nothing to fear. And the reality is, as soon as you feel prepared and have those strategies, what you'll find is you don't have difficult participants. You don't even really have difficult behaviour. What you have is flexibility to handle whatever behaviour you encounter in your meeting. Please hit the thumbs up if you like this video. There's loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.